All right, today I just wanted to share with you some of the updates I've been making to Pro Audio Workshop Seeing Sound over the last few months. So first of all, the course, this whole page, onlineaudioengineeringcourses.com, now has a navigation bar. Pretty simple thing, but I used to think that it didn't need it before, and then several students told me that it did, so I added one. I'm not a web programmer, so it took me a little bit of time to figure it out, but there it is. And I agree, it's very helpful to just have some quick links up there all the time. So getting into the course updates themselves, the first lesson I updated was lesson 2.5, Visualizing Speaker Coverage. So it used to only cover basically on-axis and off-axis, and I realized that it needs a little bit more detail. So the course, so this lesson now covers on-axis near, on-axis far, off-axis, vertical top and vertical bottom, and then in the field demo, let me see if there's a diagram here though, so this is more clear what I'm talking about. So this is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Labels for speaker coverage so we can talk about them and know what each other are talking about, right? So then I also created a field demo where I do an autopsy of a speaker. And the fun thing was that I set up a camera up above me so that as I'm using the audio analyzer here, you can watch me move around the room and find these points that I just described. So the lesson teaches you about how to label these points in a speaker's coverage pattern, and then how to find them. And so you watch me move around and find those points. Let me see if I can get to the end here. So here we go. So see this yellow line? This is kind of the speaker's coverage shape that I was trying to find. Okay, so pretty fun. Lesson 2.15. The next update is lesson 2.8 and 2.83. These are all about subwoofer arrays. Now I used to only have one lesson about subwoofer arrays, but I broke it apart into two, so now I have one lesson all about line arrays and one lesson all about the inline two-element gradient subwoofer array. So first, lesson 2.8. This talks a lot about the effects of line length and the effects of spacing. So what happens when we put two speakers next to each other and then add more and more and more? What happens if we have a really long line of subwoofers? How does that change the coverage shape? And then what happens if we put space between those subs? And what's the difference between coupled and uncoupled? Oh, here we go. So I answer this question. How far apart can you space your subs? And then we do a demo, and that looks pretty funny. And I go through a lot of examples of how line length changes the shape. I think that's pretty much it for this lesson. So let's go to the next lesson. This one's all about the two-element gradient inline subwoofer array. Fancy name for a very simple, easy to use directional subwoofer array, which is why I use it a lot and why I like to teach it in my course. I talk about how to choose the spacing, what that's going to mean for the settings that you use, and then I have a new field demo here where I show you a really common setup that I use, and then I deploy some microphones to show you how to verify that setup. So then a lot of the lesson is actually looking at Smaart and talking about how to read these phase traces and do the verification of this array. And I also go over some problems that might come up when reading these phase traces, especially when there are boundaries nearby. It can be really hard to do this kind of verification if there is a wall or any other reflective surfaces. Okay, subwoofer arrays. The next update was 3.1, and that is horizontal aim. So over in the aim module, 3.1, now the reason I wanted to redo this, I basically just add another field example. It's just because sometimes it can be so much easier to show something than to continue to try to explain it. So there are some measurements I do every time I get into the field, And it, here in this video, I think it takes me like 60 seconds to show you, but it would have taken me, 5 minutes to try and write it out and explain it. So that's the update to lesson 3.1. And the last one is an update to lesson 3.2. This is all about vertical aim. And this one, the lesson didn't change that much, but I just cleaned up the way I explain it. So I think it was kind of confusing the way I explained it in the past. And now in 3.2, I think it's a lot clearer. I explain exactly for what situations this technique will work. And I teach you a technique to estimate the vertical aim. But there are just some situations it'll work in and some situations it won't. Another really important update to lesson 3.2 is that then I teach you how to connect this estimation that you come up with for vertical aim to your clinometer. So if you're in the field and you've got a speaker and you're about to send it up into the air, you probably want to put your clinometer on there. Oh, you can't see my hand. Put your clinometer on there and figure out what the angle is going to be before it goes up in the air. A lot of times it's easier to aim the speaker on the ground, then send it up in the air than it is to send it up in the air, then climb up on a ladder or go up in a lift and put a laser on there. And so I realized that we need to be able to know how to do both, right? And let me just give you a quick demo here. Right, so I teach the method for estimating the vertical aim. And then when we get into the field here, I talk about how to take those measurements and basically just use some simple properties of a triangle to then turn our estimated vertical aim into a clinometer reading that we expect to see when we put our clinometer on the speaker. I want you to know, since I stopped on this screen here, that this looks like a lot of numbers and it looks like it might be confusing, but it's actually pretty simple. I walk you through it step by step, and I even give you a really simple cheat code at the end in case you ever forget all of this stuff. Okay, so those are the updates to Pro Audio Workshop Seeing Sound. Let me know if you have any questions about these.